For 19 years he had been loyal. For 19 years he had protected his family. But when he grew old and weak, they abandoned him like an old piece of furniture. Now, in a cold shelter, Duke had lost all hope. No one wanted an aging German shepherd. No one even looked at him. But then a woman walked in, and everything changed. Stay with us, because this story will break your heart and put it back together again. The cold air seeped through the thin walls of the Montana Haven Animal Shelter, carrying the sound of barking dogs and the faint whimpers of those who had given up. Among them, Duke lay curled up in the back of his cage, his once powerful frame reduced to a fragile shadow of itself. His fur, once thick and golden, was now graying, patchy, and matted. His legs trembled even when he stood. But Duke didn't stand much anymore. He had been here for 6 months. 6 months of people passing by, their eyes lighting up at puppies, at strong young dogs, but never at him. No one wanted the 19-year-old German shepherd with cloudy eyes and weak bones. "Poor guy," whispered Emma, a young shelter volunteer, as she refilled Duke's water bowl. "He barely drinks anymore." Greg, the shelter owner, stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Duke with sad eyes. "We've tried everything." He stopped eating the moment he realized his family wasn't coming back for him. He sighed. "He's just waiting. And I don't know if he's waiting for a home or just, waiting to give up." Duke's ears flicked at the sound of their voices, but he didn't lift his head. He had stopped caring. Until she walked in. Sarah Bennett wasn't here to adopt a dog. She hadn't stepped foot in the shelter in over a year. The last time she had been here, she was with her husband, Jake. They used to volunteer together, spending weekends walking the abandoned dogs. Then Jake got sick, and in what felt like the blink of an eye, he was gone. Sarah had shut the door on so many things after his death, but today something had pulled her back. Maybe it was the silence in her house. Maybe it was the ache in her chest that never quite went away. Or maybe it was fate. She walked past rows of eager dogs, tails wagging, barking happily for attention, but then her eyes fell on a cage in the farthest corner. She stopped. Inside lay a German shepherd, unlike any she had ever seen. He didn't move. He didn't bark. He didn't even look up. A chill ran through her. Something about the way he lay there, so still, so resigned, felt painfully familiar, like she was looking into a mirror. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Greg and Emma exchanged glances. "That's Duke," Greg said softly. "He's been here 6 months. He's old, Sarah, really old." Sarah took a step closer, kneeling beside the cage. "How did he end up here?" Greg exhaled. "His family brought him in. Said he was too old, that they didn't have time to deal with him anymore." His voice hardened with anger. 19 years, Sarah. 19 years he was theirs, and they just left him." Sarah's breath caught. 19 years. The weight of those words settled deep inside her. How could someone do that? How could anyone throw away something they had loved for so long? Her fingers gripped the cold metal bars. "Does he ever respond?" Emma shook her head. "Not really. He barely eats, doesn't react to people. It's like he's already gone." Sarah's heart clenched. She looked back at Duke. His ribs rose and fell in slow, shallow breaths. His ears were scarred from time. His body, once strong, looked exhausted. But it wasn't just his body that was tired. It was his soul. She had seen that look before, in herself. Without another word, Sarah unlatched the cage door and stepped inside. "Duke," she whispered. Nothing. She reached out, her hand hovering just above his dull fur. "Duke, look at me." The old shepherd stirred slightly, and for the first time his cloudy brown eyes met hers. A single moment passed between them, a moment that would change both of their lives forever. Duke's eyes met Sarah's for just a second, just long enough for her to see it. Pain, confusion, loss. Then, just as quickly, the old shepherd's gaze drifted away, back to nothingness. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Most shelter dogs reacted when someone stepped into their cage. Some wagged their tails. Some barked excitedly. Some even cowered. But Duke did nothing. He had given up. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the metal bars of the kennel. "Sarah, don't get your hopes up," Greg said softly behind her. "He's not like the others." She glanced back at him. "What do you mean?" Greg sighed and ran a hand over his beard. "We've had older dogs before. Some come in scared, some aggressive, some depressed. But Duke, he's different." He hesitated. "Duke's empty. We don't know if it's because of his age or because of what happened to him before he got here." Sarah turned back to the frail German shepherd. 19 years, she murmured. "That's a lifetime." She took a slow breath. "He wasn't always like this." Emma perked up. "What do you mean?" Sarah reached out tentatively, letting her hand hover inches from Duke's fur. "I don't know much about shepherds, but I know dogs, and no dog makes it to 19 without someone loving him first. No dog survives that long without fighting to live." Emma bit her lip, looking at Duke sadly. "So, what happened to him?" Greg crossed his arms. "We only know what his owners told us, and honestly, I don't trust a word of it." Sarah frowned. "What did they say?" Greg exhaled sharply. "That he was just a family pet, that he was slowing down, that they didn't have time to care for an old dog anymore." His jaw tightened. "They made him sound like an inconvenience, not like a best friend, not like a dog who had given them his entire life." Sarah's stomach twisted. She turned back to Duke. "Did they say how long they had him?" Greg hesitated. Then, with a grim nod, he said, "Since he was a puppy." Sarah's breath caught. They had him for 19 years, and they still walked away. A wave of emotions crashed over her. Anger, disbelief, sadness. But the worst was understanding. Because she had lost someone too, and that kind of loss changed a person, or, in Duke's case, it changed a dog. Sarah took a deep breath. "I'll take him." Emma's head snapped up. "Wait, really?" Greg frowned. "Sarah, are you sure? I'll take him," she repeated, firmer this time. Greg hesitated. Then he glanced at Duke. "He might not even make it through the night," he warned. "He hasn't eaten properly in weeks." Sarah's heart clenched, but she lifted her chin. "Then at least he won't spend his last night alone." A beat of silence. Then Greg nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll get the paperwork." Sarah turned back to Duke, reaching out once more. This time, she let her fingers graze his fur. "You're coming home, Duke." Had followed her. It was small, almost nothing, but after everything, it felt like the beginning of something. Sarah knelt, grabbing a bowl and filling it with food. Duke stood a few feet away, watching. "I know you don't trust me yet," she murmured, stirring warm broth over the kibble. "But we're getting there, aren't we?" She set the bowl down. Duke stared at it. Sarah held her breath. Seconds passed, and then Duke lowered his head and took his first bite. Sarah exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and something dangerously close to hope swelling in her chest. He wasn't just surviving, he was trying. As the days passed, Duke's walls began to crack just a little. He still slept most of the time, still barely acknowledged her, but he followed her now. Whenever she moved from one room to another, he would trail behind her, never close, never touching, but always watching. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it meant something. One evening, Sarah sat on the couch, a blanket draped over her legs, flipping through old photos. Duke lay nearby, his head resting on his paws. She smiled sadly, tracing her fingers over an image of Jake holding a puppy. It had been taken years ago, back when they had first talked about adopting a dog, back before hospitals, before grief, before loss. Sarah sighed and set the picture down. She glanced at Duke. "I think you would have liked him," she whispered. Duke lifted his head. Sarah blinked in surprise. He had reacted. Something about her words he had understood. Her pulse quickened. "Who were you before they left you?" She had to know. She had to find out. And something deep inside told her that when she did, It would change everything. Duke was changing. It was slow, so slow that anyone else might not have noticed. But Sarah did. He ate now, not much, but enough. He followed her around the house, watching her like he was trying to understand her. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was silent, he would let out a quiet sigh, a sound that felt like the weight of a lifetime settling into his old bones. Sarah knew that feeling well. Loss did that to you. But what had Duke lost? And more importantly, who had he been before they threw him away? She had to know. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She grabbed her car keys and headed out, this time not to the shelter, but to the people who had abandoned him. She had Greg's records. She knew their names. She wasn't looking for a confrontation. She just wanted answers. The house was larger than she expected, a 2-story home with a wraparound porch, a perfectly trimmed lawn, and a luxury car in the driveway. This wasn't some struggling family forced to give up their dog. No, they had simply chosen to. Sarah clenched her jaw and knocked on the door. A woman in her early 60s answered, dressed in a pressed cardigan and pearls. She had the kind of face that had never known hardship. She blinked at Sarah, frowning. "Can I help you?" Sarah took a steady breath. "Hi, my name is Sarah Bennett. I adopted Duke." The woman's face remained blank. Sarah felt something inside her tighten. "Your dog, the one you left at the shelter." For a long moment the woman said nothing. Then, with an unbothered sigh, she shook her head. "Oh, him. Not Duke, not our dog. Just him." Sarah's hands curled into fists. "I was hoping you could tell me about his past," she said, keeping her voice level. I want to understand where he came from." The woman pursed her lips. "We had him for a long time, but he was getting old, slowing down. It wasn't fair to keep him." Sarah's stomach twisted. "So you abandoned him?" The woman didn't even flinch. "We gave him a chance to be adopted by someone else." Sarah saw red. "He's 19, she snapped. "No one was going to adopt him. You knew that." The woman crossed her arms. "Why are you here?" Sarah exhaled sharply. "Because Duke isn't just any dog. There's something about him, something I don't understand, and I think it has to do with his past." The woman hesitated, just for a second. Sarah caught it. "You know something, don't you?" For the first time, the woman looked uncomfortable. Then she sighed. "You should talk to my husband." He was already waiting for them in the living room, a tall man in his 60s, gray-haired, with a face carved by time and regret. His eyes flickered with something unreadable when Sarah introduced herself. "So you have him now?" he murmured. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "He wasn't supposed to be ours." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" The man exhaled, rubbing his temples. "We didn't get him as a pet. He was a working dog, a partner." Sarah's breath caught. "A partner?" The man met her gaze. He was a K9, my K9. Sarah stared. The world tilted. "You were a cop?" she asked. He nodded. "Retired now, but Duke wasn't always Duke. Back then he was Shadow. And he wasn't just a good dog, he was the best." Her pulse roared in her ears. She had known Duke was different. She had felt it from the start. But a K9, that explained everything. The discipline, the watchfulness, the way he understood things even without being told, and the way he had reacted to Jake's picture. Her throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell the shelter?" The man's face darkened. "Because it didn't matter. He was old. No one would want him." Sarah's jaw clenched. "But he wasn't just a pet to you. He was your partner. He would have died for you." The man looked away. "I know." Sarah took a sharp breath. "So why did you abandon him?" His hands curled into fists. "Because I couldn't watch him die." Silence. A heavy, awful silence. Sarah felt something inside her crack. "He gave you everything, and you just walked away?" The man's expression twisted, a mixture of shame and something else. He wasn't himself anymore, he said quietly. He started getting confused, started forgetting commands. His legs weren't strong. It hurt to see him like that. He wasn't the dog I knew anymore. Sarah's stomach churned. "That's not a reason to throw him away," she whispered. The man flinched. Sarah had heard enough. She turned sharply, heading for the door. "Wait," the man called. She stopped. Is he still fighting?" he asked. Sarah exhaled shakily, and then, in a voice laced with unbreakable certainty, she answered, "Yes." And then she walked out.